So good evening. This is yet another webinar by Welcome Solutions. And in these webinars, we talk with PhDs and PhD candidates working in interesting areas, both in science and industry. And we talk about careers, we talk about life hacks, and we talk about how to develop yourself in the right direction and how to navigate yourself in the job market, which is, as we all know, very, very complex. So please join us and please subscribe to this channel if you would like to explore this topic and learn something and also share with us. And today I'm very happy to introduce a great guest, Danni Reches, who is actually originally Dutch, but she unfortunately no longer lives in the Netherlands. So today she's connecting with us from Israel. And Danni received her BA, so Bachelor of Arts in Middle Eastern Studies from Leiden University in the Netherlands. And she also holds a Bachelor of Arts certificate in Peace and Conflict Studies and a Master of Arts degree in Diplomacy with cum laude. With a specialization, cum laude is the most important here, with a specialization in international relations from University of Haifa in Israel. And currently she's a PhD fellow and research associate at the Haifa Center for German and European Studies at the University of Haifa. And what is also very, very important for us here is that Danni also hosts the podcast, What Are You Going to Do With That? A very important thing to know and very interesting podcast. So the podcast is hosted at the Minerva Center for the Rule and Law under Extreme Conditions at the University of Haifa. And in the podcast, she talks with early career researchers about their academic journey and raises awareness for mental health in academia. So I'm very, very happy to see you, Danni, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and especially given that you are doing your PhD in Humanities, and this is one of the areas where, at least in the Netherlands, this is an area that is not that is underrepresented among PhD candidates. So I'm very happy to be able to talk to you today and look at your perspective at the job market. So thank you again, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and your story in your own words.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and also a big thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar today. I think what you're doing is wonderful, to be able to speak with people from different fields and what they're trying to do after academia, career-wise, which is also very relevant for me at the moment. And I also understand that most of the people you've invited so far already have their PhDs, are already doctors. And as you mentioned, I'm still a PhD fellow. So I hope I can live up to expectations. And we'll see about that once we get into our conversation. So because I was invited to talk here today as the host of the podcast that you mentioned, what are you going to do with that? I'd like to briefly say a little bit more about that and the Minerva Center before I start fully introducing myself. So what you should know is that I am the host of the podcast. What are you going to do with that? But the brain behind the podcast is Ireneusz Pawel, and he is the producer and the editor. So it's not something I'm doing alone. We have a small team behind the project, and I honestly wouldn't have been able to do it by myself. So it's really great that we have each other to go through it. So the podcast is embedded at the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law under Extreme Conditions at the University of Haifa. I am talking to you from Haifa in Israel, as you said. So the Minerva Center is focusing on two things, mostly on law and geology. And we are joined, half of our center basically is in Hamburg University in Germany. And you can view any talks by our PIs and postdoc fellows who are working on these topics of the rule of law under extreme conditions, for example, terrorism or natural disasters, on the Minerva Center's YouTube channel. We also have a YouTube channel. But more importantly, is for me at least, and maybe for this talk, is that the Minerva Center also facilitates our podcast. of which we just finished the first season of 20 episodes. And you can listen to all of these episodes through Spotify, YouTube, and any other major podcast platform, whatever you're using, maybe Google or iTunes, anything really. So in each of those episodes, you've already mentioned it a little bit, Natalia, I chat with an early career researcher, or an ECR, as we call them, about their academic journey, including struggles that they faced, but also some of their successes, and really what they want to do with that, hence the title of the podcast. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the podcast and what people want to do with that and careers later on in this talk. So now I can talk a little bit maybe about my own journey. So you already mentioned in the introduction that I am originally from the Netherlands, but that I'm now in Israel. So how did that happen? And how did I get to study in both places? Actually, I was born and raised in the Netherlands, but I have dual citizenship. I'm also an Israeli citizen from birth. And after high school, I decided not to go into academia and study immediately. I went for a gap year to Israel. And for a whole year, I volunteered, during which I kind of figured out what it was that I wanted to study. And by the time that year ended, I figured that I wanted to do a bit of a smaller studies, not something huge like political science or law schools that have 500 first-year students in their benches, of which then quite a big percentage also quits within the first year. We see that in the Netherlands in the statistics a lot. So I decided to go for something smaller that combines all of the things that I liked. A little bit of language, a little bit of history, a little bit of culture, all of these things. So I decided to start my BA in Leiden University in Middle Eastern Studies. And through that, I was also able to do an exchange program at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So to return to Israel, where I had so much fun during my gap year. After my BA, I did know that I wanted to continue with an MA, but that it was also maybe a good time for me to travel, which I always really wanted to do. So I took a break between my BA and my MA, and I traveled for about 9 months in Asia, including India, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, places like that. Great experience. And then straight from that, I moved officially to Israel, because in Israel, I was able to go into social sciences for my master's degree, for my Master of Arts. Whereas in the Netherlands, if I wanted to continue an MA in political science, which is what I now wanted to do, I would have had to do an extra year to bridge my BA that was based in humanities to move on to an MA in social sciences, which is a different faculty. In Israel, and in the University of Haifa, I was able to straight go into the MA in political science, in diplomacy, which is a specialty in international relations that I finished cum laude, as you very nicely said from my short bio. I was able to go there straight because I had taken some courses at the University in Jerusalem and the University in Haifa in political science. So that saved me some time and had me an opportunity to move to the country where I now also had my partner. So that helped very much. And it was exactly this partner that I traveled with to Australia after I finished my MA. So I took a lot of breaks in between my academic career. How did I get into the PhD? I wrote an MA thesis for diplomacy on the refugee crisis in the European Union. And my MA thesis supervisor told me, hey, you're working on the European Union, and there's not so many people who are doing that here at the University of Haifa. And I'm also affiliated with a center that works on the European Union. Like you said, the Haifa Center for German and European Studies. So she said, why don't you try to apply for a position that we have for PhD students that comes with a scholarship? So I said, all right, I can try and do that. That would be interesting. I really liked what I wrote about. I really got passionate about the topic I wrote about for my MA thesis. So I really wanted to continue with that. But I said, so I applied from Australia because I was traveling at the time. And then while I was traveling, I got the good news that upon my return, I'd be able to start my PhD in migration studies, which is an interdisciplinary field. you've mentioned that it's very interesting to talk to someone from humanities, and that is my background. I've done my BA in that, but my MA is in social sciences and political science. And now in migration studies, I'm combining both of them, which to a lot of people in both of those faculties is also very confusing. And sometimes I really have to prove myself to either one that I do understand to a certain extent what I'm doing as a student. And then now I'm in my second year of my PhD. In total, I'm supposed to take 4. I could extend it if I have to, especially due to the corona situation. The university allows for extensions, but 4 years is supposed to be the time to finish. And now in my second year, since March, also started doing the podcast through the Minerva Center. And that's been great fun, but also a very good learning experience, just like what you're doing here in the webinar, where I get to chat with people in the same field, but also in different fields, also from STEM that I don't know anything about. And it's been wonderful. So I'm ready for any questions if you have any.
Fantastic, Danny. Thank you so much for your introduction. Yeah, I'm actually, I can tell you that when I hear someone saying, I decided to take a gap year, then I know that there will be interesting story coming out of it, because for myself, it also happened so this way. So actually, I decided to take a gap year after my PhD contract expired, just to take some new perspective and to rest a bit after my PhD before I take a postdoc. And then my story completely changed and my scope of interest changed. So yeah, when I hear anyone saying I just took a gap year, I knew that they would get some new inspiration and new ideas and probably change the course of their studies or their work. So that's funny. Okay, great. Thank you so much for your story. And my first question, maybe that is a bit off topic, but actually drew my attention, and I cannot help not asking this question. So my question would be, since I myself live in the Netherlands since almost 10 years, I'm very curious, because like quality of life here is so high, and the quality of higher education as well. And also the job market is relatively, I think, humanly compared to some other countries. Actually, my question would be, what made you take this decision to stay in Israel, and how would you compare the quality of life there and also the research opportunities there to the opportunities you would have in the Netherlands? So are you ever planning to come back, or is Israel your destination and you would like to stay there for your career?
I knew that question was going to come up at some point. It's a question that I get from almost everyone. Okay. And my answer is pretty much this. It's not a final destination for me to be here in Israel now. But the Netherlands is also not a final destination in my mind. I am born and raised with the idea that I fit in both places. I speak the language in both places. I have family and friends in both places that are very dear to me. I am capable of working in both places. I've studied in both. So it's very difficult to say, one is better because of A, B, C, because the other country makes up for it in X, Y, Z, right? And whenever I am in the Netherlands, I do miss a little bit of Israel, especially the sun and the beach, but also the food. And when I'm in Israel, I miss things from the Netherlands. We just had a little chat about how decaf coffee from Albert Heijn is actually pretty good, and we don't have that here, for example. So it's really in the small things. Education-wise, it's like I said, for me, it was a smart move to come to Israel when I did, because I wanted to continue in political science. And here I could do that without delaying studying for an extra year, and also to pay tuition for an extra year, right? It is in a way cheaper to study in a university in Israel. I got a little bit of help from the government, and I also got some scholarships here in Israel that I would have never gotten had I stayed in the Netherlands. It would have been probably much harder and bigger competition for me to do a PhD in the Netherlands, whereas here in Israel, I'm able to do that. So it depends on what stage in life I think you're in and what you're looking for. Also, I really love this city. I don't know if you've ever seen any pictures of Haifa, but I'm on top of a mountain with breathtaking views, and it's right at the beach. So I get to go whenever I feel like it.
Okay, sounds fantastic. Sounds fantastic. Okay, so and actually relating to what you said before about the fact that you're still a PhD candidate, I must say that I was myself a PhD candidate when I was starting this webinar, because it was in April and I graduated in June. So formally I was still a PhD candidate when I first started. So, you know, that's doesn't say much about how much you have to say about the job market for PhDs, I think. It's more
Well,
about...
congratulations, firstly.
Thank you. Okay, and okay, so again, this is like the ocean in which I don't often swim, because I'm myself a STEM I was a STEM researcher, come from STEM, and I'm mostly familiar with the job market for PhDs in STEM, and in this podcast, in this webinar, we are mostly actually interested in that aspect of our career. So, what opportunities does our academic education give us later in our careers when we want to try ourselves in the real world, in industry? So, I would like to ask you a little bit about that. My question would be, how do you perceive your scope of opportunities as a person who is related to political science and has background in humanities? And could you explain what is the scope of professions that you might potentially consider, and scope of places that you might consider as your future employers? And what type of career tracks can you consider? So, you know, given your own experience and also what you see among your peers who are a little bit more advanced, so what are the typical tracks that people around you that have similar education typically choose?
Right, a very good question, and very relevant. It's something you say, like, I don't know anything about the humanities. And there's this myth, really, that people usually say, and it's the first thing they ask me, like, oh, you studied Middle East? Oh, you studied diplomacy, and now you're doing migration? And then the question is, what are you going to do with that? And that's exactly why the podcast is titled that way, because we started with the idea, okay, we're going to start talking with friends in our episodes and people from our Minerva Center. And we get these questions all the time. So this would be a good title, because it shows like we're going to explain to people through this podcast what we can do with these fields of study. So I'd be glad to help explain that a little bit, but it would be very much from my own experience. And I believe everyone has their own journey and their own goal, professional goals. So it would be very different for everyone. Yeah, what are you going to do with that? To be honest, my mother, I've been very lucky that my mother has always been telling me that it's more important to do what you like, because then you'll be good at it and you could also make money with it, instead of doing something you don't like just because you're chasing the money. And I honestly believe in that. So that's a little bit how I try to shape my life. And that's why I wasn't afraid, as a lot of people sometimes tell me they are, to travel or volunteer in between different degrees and studying. Of course, you need to be a little bit privileged for that. You need to be able to do that, to take time off, to have some money saved for these things. But if you're capable of doing that, I think it will give you a lot of extra, just like you mentioned, that people who have a gap year or who've traveled a lot have some good stories, but also some have done some soul searching to figure out what it is they want to do. So what did I figure out so far I want to do? It changes. to be honest. It changes in different stages. Right now, and what I've been doing for a while is trying to develop different skills that I'm interested in developing. So I'm interested in going into the field of policy making or advising policymakers on what works and what doesn't in the field of migration and integration. So what do I need to get there? That's a good question that I'm still figuring out. Of course, I'm trying through social media and LinkedIn and following all kinds of companies that work in this field, such as think tanks or larger organizations such as the EU or the UN are doing in this field, what they're promoting, what the trends are, so that I know that I can focus my research a little bit more towards these trends, so it stays more relevant. And I've also tried to always work next to my studies, not only because it was necessary, because obviously I needed the salary, but it was also jobs that would give me these skills that you would need for a job market outside of academia, right? So this could be something that I've done in my last job, which I've been doing as a PhD student, as a part-time job. I used to work as an academic assistant or a bit of someone who helps with organizing events at the research center where I also do my PhD. So there I managed to organize all kinds of events such as bar talks, international conferences. I've also facilitated visiting foreign delegations from politicians to academics. And I've also helped supervising some interns that we had every semester. So through doing that job, I gained a lot of extra skills that I wouldn't have had only through my education in academia, such as organizing skills, all kinds of communication skills, of course, to organize these events, but also basic stuff like being part of an administration of a larger body and understanding how that works. And in a way that hasn't only given me those skills for the job market, it has also helped me understand the way that the university works better. And that on its own has also helped me get through the system of the university and its administration in a way, which is also very valuable. And then it's also very important to, when we talk about resumes and what skills you want to write on it, if you're looking for a job outside of academia, whenever you're ready for that, is to explain the skills that you've learned and how they're useful outside of academia. So for example, I've been to quite a few conferences to present my MA thesis research. So if I just write all of these conferences on my resume, it's very full, very fast. And it doesn't really help someone, an employer from outside of academia. But to write that you're comfortable in public speaking, and that you have experience in that, and that you can explain complicated issues to lay people, that's a skill that you can use also outside of academia. So it's a little bit of tweaking and understanding of what skills you already have, and looking for maybe part-time jobs while you're doing your studies that will help you get skills that you want to work with later. I hope that sort of answered your question in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I can tell you one thing about moving towards policy making, because it was 2 or 3 weeks ago in this webinar we had a guest, Adriana Bankston, who made a successful switch between a postdoc in biology. So she was really it was really hardcore STEM sciences, and she made that leap towards policymaking in the US, and it took her quite a while. So, and I like to be realistic. I mean, if you make that huge switch in career, then yeah, I mean, it takes time. And in her case, it was between 2 and 3 years. And what her successful strategy was that she got hired in a few nonprofits. And I think she was also really working hard on her CV, so she was taking a lot of extracurricular activities. So that's very close to what you said. So she also, I can tell that she's very active. She actively searches for opportunities to speak as well, and yeah, so that she is visible. And she also helped me with my book. Actually, she also wrote her testimony for my book, and she wrote a little bit about her transition to industry. So she's actually very, very active, and it takes time. So I can tell that at least in the Netherlands, this is the case also, that if you have a PhD, especially in STEM sciences, that where you have any programming skills and you want to get any job in data science, in AI, in IT, in any area where programming skills are necessary, then it's very easy. And also in biotech, I mean, now we have crisis, but biotech industry is also very welcoming to PhDs in sciences typically. So also making that transition is relatively simple if you are thinking about laboratory work. But to get any of these positions that are based on soft skills, so mostly communication and logistics and management, it's quite hard. And I think it requires more time as a rule of thumb than just jumping from specialistic position that requires very specialistic hard skills to industry, to the position in industry that requires the same. And actually, I don't know about how situation looks in Israel, but in the Netherlands there is a bit of a stereotype that actually students in humanities have hard life in that department, because it's not only that it's much harder to find a funded PhD if you're in humanities or political sciences in the Netherlands, so most PhDs are not even paid. Whereas in STEM sciences, it's quite obvious that you will be paid, and these are good, very good salaries, I think, for the beginner, for your starting salary. Whereas in humanities, this is not necessarily the case. Plus, according to the stereotype, it's quite hard also to transition to industry after finishing PhD. So indeed, it requires more self-navigation skills, and requires patience as well, and also building your CV and building your portfolio and your contacts and network as well. But I think you're doing great, especially given the podcast. And I really like your the way you start the podcast with Amaretto. I think it's really a very classy way of starting. So
Thank you.
yeah, I was actually, when I saw this first, like I heard this first, I thought about doing something like along those lines, but then I was like, nah, this is Danny's style. I will not do anything like this. Okay. And let me ask you this question then. And also one comment, guys. You can ask your questions in the chat, please. You're very welcome to ask. So we will take questions.
Before you ask the next question, I just thought of something else that I might be able to add to your last question, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So it's like you say, for humanities, people coming from humanities, it might be harder also to figure out what you want to do with that, right? Because if you study a medicine, then you're studying to become a doctor. And and maybe even also in law, right? If you study law, you become a lawyer. And it's very clear what you could do with that. But when you study history, then are you going to be a historian? Like, the world doesn't need that many historians, right? As many as people start studying history every year. So it is like you say, it's more, you have to put in more effort yourself to find what it is you want to do with that, and then to see what industry, if industry is also open to that. What I've seen from peers that I've studied with in my BA in Leiden in Middle Eastern Studies is that most of them worked with their language skills that they gained. So we had to study either Persian, Turkish, or Arabic in our degree. And a few of them are now actually working for what in the Netherlands is called the END, the Integration and Migration Services of the Netherlands. and they're working there focusing on incoming asylum seekers. And these are very, very interesting things. And it's a government position, so it's not even that bad. And something that's very interesting because it changes every day. So this has always been something on my mind that I thought if it doesn't work out in policy and what I inspire to do, then at least I get to work with asylum seekers or with migrants and help them move forward, which is something that I'm definitely passionate about.
So what do you think are your biggest strengths as a professional? It can be anything. It can be something you learned in your studies, or it can be something that just your personality traits. What would you name as 3 things that you're the best at?
What I'm the best at? Well, I definitely am the organization kind of type. Maybe that's the Dutch half of me that comes really in handy here in Israel, to be able to be punctual, to be timely, and work in an organized manner. I think that's very important, and it also works, I guess, for most PhD students because they have to plan their own work, right? You're an independent worker solving issues by yourself. Other 2 good things. Oh, it almost feels like a job interview now. I have to think about it for a minute. I'm focusing now. I'm switching a little bit in the kind of research that I'm doing. I'm doing my PhD dissertation on the perception that the media creates on immigrants coming from the Middle East and North Africa into the European Union. So what Europeans kind of think of these people from these areas coming in, and how that perception really influences policymaking and changes in migration and integration policy in these countries. And Germany and the Netherlands are my case studies because I can actually read the original sources in these languages. And for other reasons, obviously, too, but these are the easiest to mention right now. But I'm switching now a little bit, also because I'm part and I have more peers in the Minerva Center, which where I know a lot of people who have studied international law, is that I'm focusing more on crisis. So there was a migration crisis in 2015, or the so-called refugee crisis. And now, of course, the corona pandemic, which is a crisis of mobility as well. And mobility, of course, is essential for migrants. So I'm focusing very much on more now than I used to on international law and asylum. And I think that this intersection is a bit more practical because you go into the field of law, right, which you combine with migration that I have more knowledge of than another lawyer because I come from humanities and social sciences. Okay. And a third thing, that might be something coming back towards the end of our conversation if I can come up with something.
Okay, great. I mean, it's not easy to answer if you don't have the answer prepared. I totally agree with this. But actually, this is something I was once asked at the one interview I had many years ago for one of the PhD projects that I was applying for. And that was actually something that surprised me, that the interviewer, who was actually also the PI in that lab, he basically looked in my face and asked me, that was actually online interview, but he looked into the camera and he asked me straight, what are your 3 best things, best qualities, and what is your weakness and the biggest weakness? So I thought, well, I have to come up with something. And of course, like a good strategy for answering this type of question, especially about the bad qualities, is to say something that can be good in many circumstances. So things like I'm a perfectionist, that is like ambivalent because perfectionism can be good as well. So that's a good life hack to keep in mind, like to have those on your mind just in case someone asks. But about good things, I don't remember what I said, but apparently I said something that he was happy about because I was then a top candidate. But still, it was shocking at first if someone asks you in the interview to basically brag about yourself. but it can happen. So it happened to me once. So ever since, I'm always prepared for this question.
The imposter syndrome is real, right?
Yes.
And this is actually, I just came up with a third thing, if you do want to know.
Oh, yeah.
That would be that I have strong intercultural communication skills. Obviously, I've moved countries, which helps in that respect. But I've also studied the Middle East. I know a lot about different religions, different minorities living here in the Middle East, and also minorities, or even from the majority, people coming from the Middle East to Europe, they're being a minority. And how these cultures and traditions and religions have interacted and developed over time. And I think that's, especially in today's day and age of fake news and a lot of polarization, is very important to have a solid base of this knowledge, of facts, right, of scientific proof. So intercultural skills, very important. And I haven't only gotten that from academia, from my studies, but also I have done some training courses. There's the EU program for education, and they do training courses for people who work mostly with youth. So these are people who work with municipalities, for example, social workers who work with youth, mostly who are a little bit behind the majority of their peer group. And through these courses that were held in Turkey, in Istanbul, and also in Berlin, in Germany, that I've joined, that were funded by the EU, I got to learn how to provide and facilitate workshops for youngsters, for example, on anti-racism, and for more inclusion. Okay. So those are skills that I've gained outside of academia, but connected to what I studied, to strengthen both the theoretical, my own theoretical framework, but also some practical skills. And then regarding that imposter syndrome that I just mentioned, that would then maybe be a nice twist, but I would ask your advice as a bit more professional than me on this topic, what you think about it. If someone would ask, what is something you're not so good at, right? Like a bad skill in a way. You said that you can mention perfectionist, being a perfectionist, because that's could go both ways. And it's not really a bad thing. But what about saying like, well, I suffer a little bit from the imposter syndrome. I always try to do better, and I'm always a bit nervous about not having done well enough. That way you would maybe expose yourself a little bit as a bit more of a vulnerable person. But on the other hand, it also shows that you always try to do better, right? What do you think?
Well, very good question. Actually, I have some opinion about this. So I think that imposter syndrome is not a bad thing to mention at the job interview, as long as you frame it well. So if you say imposter syndrome, that sounds like a mental disorder, that sounds not good, that sounds like it's like a medical problem. So it's like, I would not frame it this way. I would say, I'm hard on myself and I really require a lot from myself, something like this, because it means that you really you pay attention to what you do and you really put a lot of pressure on yourself, and it kind of implies that you are hard on yourself and you're critical about yourself more than the environment typically. So it kind of strongly suggests the imposter syndrome, but it sounds more like I'm really professional, really dedicated, I really try hard, then I have a mental condition,
Right. So it's all about how you frame it.
Yes. Yeah. And actually funny that you're saying about imposter syndrome, because when I get this question about my 3 best qualities, I have the opposite problem. I'm like, only 3? I could say 20, like which ones I should choose now. So I don't really think I have an imposter syndrome. I'm like, the top 3, I have no idea. I just have to pick per, depending on with whom I'm talking, I have to pick another 3 qualities. So it's I think this is the first thing you should do before you go to industries to heal from imposter syndrome. Really start looking at positives, and also positives in yourself, because we all have at least 30 qualities that we could consider like strength in the job market. So really, and maybe even list them, think about them, list them, put them on your wall, look at them every day, just embrace that you have all these good sides and just focus on those. And I think, I mean, I don't think I ever had really imposter syndrome. So it's also that I hear about it a lot, but I think, it's like you have to focus on positives. Like I know also, like I also have like weaknesses, but it's like I'm just choosing to do things that where my weaknesses don't come out, because for instance, I know that I learn programming like slower than some of my peers did at studies. Like I could easily notice that I'm not as efficient programmer, and I don't learn as fast, and I will probably never be a top programmer. So I chose to do also in my PhD project. I chose a project where the conceptual part was actually, and the designing a new method was more important than how many lines of code you write. So actually, in the end, amounts of codes that I had to write was minimal almost. It was really small compared to the impact of the whole project. So I was always like just choosing for the ways to choose projects where I could show off my skills, which in this case, my conceptual thinking was actually always better than my programming skills. And my writing skills were also better. So I was just conceptually thinking a lot before, and then programming part was I was making the minimal effort. Well, it was still a lot of effort, but as you know, I tried to put as much focus on the writing part and presentation as possible, and I wasn't impressing people with the quality of my programming. I was impressing people with my new concepts and also the way I can explain them to the audience. So it's like up to you to know your weaknesses and try to get around them, I think.
Right, I do like that message of focusing on the positive stuff. I mean, it's like you said, everyone has weaknesses, right? And that's something that we have to deal with, but it doesn't mean that we don't have any skills or other positive things. I mean, we have been researching complicated issues, most of us at least, for almost 10 years at least, right? If you complete a PhD and you do everything straight in a row with the BA and the MA and the extra courses that you have to take and the PhD. So you might not have been in industry, but you have been doing something for over 10 years. So we need to recognize that.
And can I ask you about your journalism, like skills for journalism, because I can clearly see them. So my question would be, wouldn't you want to also kind of go that direction and try yourself as a journalist in the future?
I have to be honest, I love writing. This is something I've always liked doing, not only academic writing, of course, but also short stories or just personal diaries, things like that. And I've always loved it. And I'll probably keep doing it. But the thing is, my mom is a journalist, and she works for a Dutch newspaper, for het Brabants Dagblad, actually, in the Netherlands, for far over 20 years now. And I understand that world is shrinking very, very fast. I mean, it's shrinking the way we know it, probably because it's adapting to all kinds of technology that's out there now, and us using our smartphones and not having a long focus span anymore to have a paper newspaper and to open that over breakfast, for example. Like, our lives are faster, and in that fast-paced newspaper as we knew it doesn't actually fit anymore. So I've always considered journalism a dying breed. And that's why I've never really considered looking into it, because the competition is so rough. A lot of people have been fired from this world because newspapers are selling less, so they also have less money and less staff. Most of these people have become freelancers. There's a lot of them out there. They all have their own little specialties, and they're not getting paid very much for what they do. So unfortunately, because of those things, even though it's something I'd be really interested in, is not something I've ever seriously considered.
It's actually, I totally agree with you. And that was also one reason why I was a bit hesitant when I was thinking of writing books, because I knew that, if you have any technical skills these days, like at this market that we have, having those like so-called hard skills and like research skills is just valued so much more. So especially in the Netherlands, if you go to companies as a data scientist or machine learning engineer or any type of laboratory worker, you can get like 3 times mean salary, or 2 times mean salary. So it's like you start from a very high level and you have like this higher like upper class or like higher middle class lifestyle. It's like it's really good quality of life straight away. So it's and you don't have to fight for it. You just get it. You get your desk, you get your salary, you get your company car. You get everything in place day one. And if you want to leave off from writing, it's really a lot of self-navigation, and this is a type of activity that is really based on personal brand to high extent. So you have to work on it for years, literally, to unfortunately to build your name. And it's like I'm now learning a little bit about that, and I can see how much of it also happens behind the scenes. So what you write is just the front end, and on the back end you have like SEO, or you have Twitter and how to build a Twitter following, and this is what people do. So they kind of tinker around their careers. It's not 20 or 30% of the time is what you spend on doing the actual content and writing, and everything else, like 70% of the time, is to actually draw attention to what you're doing. And this is also the part I don't particularly enjoy. And this is actually the majority of your time at some point. And I'm also like, oh, what did I go towards? Because sometimes it's just not what you expect at first. So I can definitely see what your concerns come from, and this is real. So it's a real problem. And so this is not the very best market for people who can communicate and who can write and create content. But I think it's also hard to predict how it would look like in 10 years time, because also most people slowly switch to people who don't professionally write. Like their ability to put together text is also shrinking, because we live in era of these short messages, like texting, SMS, and Twitter. So I think in 10 years' time, maybe the amount of people who can write and put together consistent text, and that is deep and understandable and like grammatically correct, will be much lower, and maybe this will be much better paid profession. So who knows how it will look like in 10 years.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it. And that's what I said, right? Like, it's not like it's simply dying, journalism. It's just changing at a very fast pace that a lot of newspapers aren't really able to catch up with. But they are obviously thinking of how to do that. Yeah, I'm curious what it will bring. Maybe it will still give me an opportunity in the future to work with that.
Okay, great. And actually, I have another question then, which is more about, again, coming back to your career so far. And I would like to ask you this. So do you have, like, looking back at what all these, so far it was mostly education and different stages of your education, which was a very interesting story. But when you think about that, like all the steps that you did so far, is there anything that that you regret from your perspective right now? Or is there any decision you ever made in your professional life that you would turn back if you could? And before you start answering, I have to tell you, almost everyone tells me that they don't regret anything. But I don't believe it. I think that, everyone, like, if someone tells me that they don't regret absolutely anything in their life, like, I always feel like, oh, you know what, this is easy answer to the question. But I think that, to be absolutely honest, like, everyone has little regrets. So I think there's definitely something that anyone would do differently if they could. I could talk for hours about all the things that I did wrong, but But is there anything when you think about what you did so far that you would like to change?
Right. So it's always easier to say that in hindsight, right? Like after the fact, after it's been done. And that's why I was actually going to say that generally, looking back on a lot of decisions I've made and things I've done, I don't regret anything. And it's not the answer you wanted to hear, as you already said. But I think there's a big difference here between regrets and having made mistakes. I have made my fair share of mistakes and things that I look back on. I was like, that might not have been the smartest move at that time. But having made that move has made me who I am today and has gotten me to the place where I am now. And luckily, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's hard to see the end of it all, I am able to say that I'm pretty happy in the place where I'm at as a PhD candidate, looking for a job that is what I've been trained to do through my education and training. And also doing what I like. So I'm not sure if I can necessarily think of any mistakes that I've made. Maybe I would have chosen different topics to write papers about to be more consistent, for example. During my MA, I took very strange classes that were really all over the place, that were somehow related with international relations, of course, but they all came from their own particular field. Like some were more on terrorism and others were more on psychology and others were more on the history of all kinds of politics. And it doesn't really seem coherent. And maybe like my resume or my degree would have looked better if I would have been more coherent that way. But on the other hand, is it a mistake? I feel like I've also learned a lot from that. Like I learned what I didn't like about some of it and what I did like about it. And that's how eventually I got to the research topic for my thesis.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a bit of a difficult question. And obviously I have made mistakes. But in the end, it's gotten me where I am now, and I'm happy with that.
Okay, that's. I think you have some skills for diplomacy. Really, I can tell. Okay, so you're probably the right person on the right spot. Okay. So, all right, I will not torture you with those questions anymore. Then, maybe let's talk again a little bit about what you're doing right now and your plans for the future. So, when is the next season of the podcast starting? What are the plans, and do you have some reflections after the first season? And yeah, could you please tell us a little bit more about how your project is developing?
Yes, of course. I love talking about the podcast. It's a really fun project that we're working on. So first, about the second season that you asked about, we're going to do that when our semester here in Israel is starting again, which is not last week, like in the rest of the world in September, but it's going to be halfway by the end of October, because here in Israel, there's the Jewish holidays that are public holidays. And they take place from about next week until the end of October. So our semester only starts after that. And we're going to start the second season with that semester. However that may look like, right? Whether that's going to be courses in class on campus or not. We're going to keep doing our podcast recording long distance, as I've been doing, just like I'm doing with you now, basically. With people from all over the world in all kinds of fields. So what I'm doing is I chat with early career researchers about their academic journey. So they tell me how they've moved from a BA to an MA to a PhD to a postdoc into their first position in academia. We very much focus on people who are in academia, even though some of them have decided or have already left academia for different jobs. And I'm trying to have them talk very openly in a supportive environment about their successes, articles that they've written, positions that they've landed that they really wanted, or grants that they've received, or conferences that were really cool that they got to go to, but also about some of the struggles. So some of the struggles that we have had guests talk about in our podcast has been obviously things such as the imposter syndrome, and how academia seems to be a lot about rejection. For every grant you get, you didn't get 10, right? For every publication, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in it, and there's probably also been quite a few rejections. So we talk about those things, but also things that such as being diagnosed with bipolar or with cancer, and someone who has also been sexually exploited. And then there's also things that are good, not necessarily only bad, but that distract you from what you want to do in academics or in a career, such as having a family while you're doing all of that. Like, life happens also when you're trying to build a career or when you're doing that in academia. And what we hope to do with this podcast is to show everyone that everyone has a very interesting story to tell and a very interesting journey. And those things are very personal and they're different for everyone. But in a way, there's a lot of things that everyone has been through and that people can relate to. So we want to share that with everyone and have tips and recommendations for people who are going through it at the moment. And that's what we've been doing and focusing on in the first season, where we've had people from STEM, we've had people from law, really any field you can imagine, even architecture. And we've had people from all over the world. I've been talking to people in the early morning hours because they were in Australia. I've been talking to people in Canada, in most countries in Europe. It's been a real roller coaster, and we intend to keep doing that for the second season that we're already planning. We don't have the episodes ready, but we've already made a little list of who we're interested in talking with. If anyone is seeing this and you know someone or you are someone who thinks, oh, this is an amazing story that I want to know more about or that I have to tell, then do find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, email us, YouTube channels, whatever. You can reach us there at What to Do With That, the podcast, and we'll be in touch with you. It'll be very interesting. This is now open for the second season, so this is when anything can still happen. Yeah, so that's really the aim, sharing the stories, having people relate to it, trying to make their journey less lonely, especially now we're all we're all working from home, and most universities are still closed due to the corona pandemic. But even before that, we know that there's a higher percentage of people facing feelings of depression among young academics, more so than in the average population. So I think it's very important to have created this safe space, and I'm very glad to see that we've reached you in the Netherlands. I didn't know you before. I'm very glad that you reached out because you've heard about the podcast, and that we're reaching everyone.
Yeah, fantastic. I promised to actually go through the first series of the podcast. Still not done with this, but yes, that's definitely on my to-do list. Good luck. I hope you get great speakers and more recognition. I also know that actually, since I myself started doing webinars and posting them, I see how much is done in this space. So it's also all of a sudden in the Corona crisis, there was an outburst of all kind of initiatives, both launched by universities, but also independent career experts and enthusiasts. to increase awareness about mental problems in academia, but also careers after you leave academia. So I can see that there is a lot of different types of materials now being posted. Actually, recently I tried to make an ontology of bring together all the resources that are available only on the topic of careers in industry for PhDs. And I couldn't, this list is being appended almost every day now because I cannot, I'm still finding new things, and I already found around 15 different books on the subject, and maybe 10 or 15 different podcasts, and 10 or 15 different blogs, and probably there is much more, and maybe 10 or 15 communities, and there are so many different things going on in parallel. So I really hope that, so what I'm trying to say is that I really hope that your podcast gets attention it deserves, because there is so much going on right now. So I know how sometimes how difficult this is to bring your message across to wider audience. So I hope that the audience across the seas will recognize this podcast and become your recurrent viewers. So hope for that. And let's now talk a little bit about your general advice for PhDs. In humanities, in political sciences, but also maybe in STEM. So very general advice that you might give to early career researchers thinking about their careers.
All right, I think in a way we have discussed some of these things already in general, right? Because I mentioned before how I think it's very important to realize what skills you have actually built that you might not be aware of during your time in academia. And this is also something you said, right? Like make a list for yourself with what skills you actually do have. And pin it above your bed so that you wake up in the morning and you know that you have all of those skills and be confident about them. I think that's very important. And you can, look up online, like, okay, so I've done this and this in research, and I've written about that and that, and like, what can I actually do with that? So go out there and find out that there's really a lot of things that you can do that you've been training for without even having known it, and discovering that you have that long list. I think that's a very important thing. More general advice, especially for people who are coming from humanities, as you say, is that you have to realize, maybe not at the start when you're 18 and you're studying a BA, but as you go along with it and you try to figure out what it is you want to do with that when you get that degree, is to figure out what it is you like to do, right? So if you're studying law because you're interested in helping people who were a victim of fraud or something like that, then choose courses and choose an internship and try to do extracurricular activities that would fit to gear your path really and narrow it down towards that, what it is you're interested in. Because like I said earlier, what it is you're interested in is probably what you're going to be best at. And if you're the best at something, you can also make money with it. So that's the second thing. And generally, I think those are really the most important things. Also, a message that I do want to send, that I try to also say in the podcast, is that doing a PhD is a very difficult and sometimes lonely experience, even though it comes with a lot of good things and a lot of people really enjoy it. And you also mentioned you didn't experience the imposter syndrome while others really do, but maybe you experience some other things that others haven't. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you've started a PhD and you're really not happy with it, because of whatever reason, like it wasn't what you thought it would be, because you can't really work with your supervisor, or because financially it's very difficult to continue doing, it's not a failure to stop something you set out to do if it doesn't give you what you need at that point in time. And I think what is beautiful about academia is that it's always there, if I may say. For example, I've been speaking to people on the podcast who have done their BA and MA and then started working in the field for 10, 15 years and then decided to go back with that experience to do a PhD. This is something that, like I said, if you find something that you want to do, that you're interested in, that you're going to be good at, you can later on always go back to. So don't try to squeeze yourself into something that doesn't work for you. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's it.
Okay, perfect. I couldn't agree more with anything you said. Actually, about the things you like, actually, I thought about it a lot recently, because my father, he's a chess player, and he was always choosing for what he liked, regardless how much it was paid. So chess, actually, especially during the transformation, once Poland became capitalistic after socialism ended, then being a chess player was not very profitable, to say the least. And actually, even then, like, he couldn't really push himself to do anything else. Like, he really wanted to do chess, and he was always obsessed about it. And even when I was born, he was actually playing chess game at that point, when he got a call that he has his first daughter. And he got a call, and he still won the game. Like, so how crazy about chess you have to be to still be able to focus enough to win the match, if you know that you have your first child. It's like he was always just, this was the priority, this was his biggest love always. So and he was always choosing that, versus my mother. She works in a corporation, and she was always choosing for whatever is best for the family. She was always choosing for the good pay, and she was always playing this corporate game to land as good position as possible. And honestly, she has much more regrets right now than my father. My father has no regrets. Like, he's like, I have nothing to say here, because I always liked my everyday at work. So how could I regret anything? And my mom, like, she has a lot of regrets. She had to sacrifice a lot. She had to sacrifice a lot of her dreams. And so I totally agree with this. And in the end, sooner or later, if you're but you have to know your strengths. I mean, you have to have a plan, because if you're just floating without any plan, then you always land in someone else's plan. So even if you just want to do things you like, then you first have to know what these things are and have a plan, because otherwise it will not happen. So that's also true. Okay, great. And okay, guys, if you have questions for Danni, this is the last chance to ask, because if not, then we will come to the end soon. So 10 seconds time for activating yourself. Please be proactive. This is what this webinar is about today. So about self-navigation and proactivity. So that's your chance to show your proactivity. Okay, so is there anything that Danni, that you still would like to add to the picture? Because I'm thinking what else I could ask you. Definitely what I like a lot about your approach is that you're this happy-go-lucky person, and that you're self-confident, and you don't know the future, but you have really good hopes for it. So I really like that. And actually, I think this is something that we also have to learn, that in like real life outside academia, it's not that you have like one goal, like become a professor, like one fixation on one point, where like one mountain to climb, but it's more that we don't know the final destination. We have to just orient ourselves to the gradient of what am I strong at, and what do I like, and don't have that one fixed picture of a precise point where we want to get. So I really like the fact that you don't have that fixation on that one point. So that's great. And is there anything else you would like to add, Danni?
Well, thank you for your kind words. I do always try to stay positive. And the only thing I wanted to add is please listen to our podcast. I think it would be wonderful. And we'd also like to hear some comments and feedback if you have any. We're very active on social media, so we can chat with you there, and looking forward. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Then on that note, I would like to thank you guys for coming and for listening to this webinar, Liv. And I would also like to tell you, if you're now watching this material on YouTube, then if you would like to get more of this content, please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss on new episodes. And please comment if you have any comments, especially if you're from Humanities. I would really love to hear your comments about how you perceive your career opportunities. This is really very interesting, especially even that, I would like to definitely know more about this. And please, if you have any questions, any comments, please put your comment under the movie, because we'll definitely answer. And again, as Danni said, please check out her podcast. It's great. And as said before, the second season is coming, so it's a project in the progress. I'm looking forward to what comes next. And thank you so much, Danni, for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your story, and I hope you. I will be watching closely what you do next, and I hope that all your plans, although the plans are also very, again, like this is a different way of planning that they teach us in academia, which I like. So your plans are more flexible, but whatever your plans are, I hope that that you'll get there soon. So thank you so much, Danni.
And thank you so much for having me.
Okay, perfect. Good luck, guys, and good night. Thank you for your attention.